Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Anouk Pappers, a branding expert who leads Signet, a firm which helps business and social leaders build their online presence, and Chantalle Couba, an experienced financial services executive who currently leads Namaste Consulting. Anouk, tell us about your background. Go ahead.
Well, I was born and raised in Amsterdam, which is why I have slight accent when I speak English. And I've always been very curious and wanting to understand different cultures, different people. So I set out and I became an anthropologist. And traveling the world was one of my big dreams. So in 2002, I created my current company, which is called CoolBrands. And I set out a project, CoolBrands around the world in 80 brands, honoring Jules Verne's around the world in 80 days, traveling around the world, interviewing CEOs, CMOs, business owners, entrepreneurs, and help them tell their story from an anthropological or third-party perspective. So it was never their story, it was always our story about them. So traveling the world, meeting interesting people, publishing books with the best stories that we encountered, until in 2014, one of the CEOs we were interviewing, he said, "It's great what you guys do for my brand, but I need you to do this for me." So that's when we shifted from, let's say, corporate branding, storytelling into storytelling for senior executives, which fast forward to today is around 95% of what we do. And we help people by defining their personal brand, articulating their brand into content, and making sure that we use Google as their wingman or wingwoman. So making sure that whenever we Google these people, the right content starts showing up.
Great.
That's a bit of my background.
Okay, Chantalle, go ahead.
Very much like Anouk, I was always intellectually curious, and my curiosity, and I'll come back to my origin background, but my curiosity was always around how do you help people do the work that's in front of them, and what do those people need to be their best? And so that's been the red thread for me throughout my career. I'm originally from the Northeast, but have lived all over the world in different time spots in my life. I've settled in the South, and professionally I started off working in consulting and very quickly came to major in banking and financial services. So my professional career has been a mix of big four consulting and or working in financial services, finance, wealth management, many aspects of the field. But I would say, again, that kind of drive and desire and passion in my career has always been around how do you help people be better? And in that red thread, I have focused upon different aspects and elements of human capital work, whether it's talent management, diversity and inclusion and equity, on and on. And my real core and desire around doing that work well is around being a great qualitative researcher. And so much like Anouk went out and interviewed people and talked to them, the best way to learn how someone does something and then try to share that benefit of that learning to other people is through great research. And so I also have my own company. Aside from having established a over 20-year career in financial services, I have my own company in which I primarily perform advisory and qualitative research. It's called Namaste Consulting. And we take on projects of various types for different types of clients, not just financial services. We also work in the nonprofit sector.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chantalle. Okay, so Anouk, tell us, give us sort of a primer on branding and what you've seen over all these years you've worked in this space.
Well, branding is, of course, is a topic or a subject that a lot of people talk about. And I think every person who has an opinion on branding, they're slightly different. And the approach on how to build a brand is very different, varying from different countries, cultures, but even, let's say, within the United States, there's a lot of ways in which people build a brand. What we have seen over the years is that corporate branding is still very important, but personal branding has really made its entry, because we live in a reputation economy where it's much more important who you are as a professional than what you do. The CEO, but also most other people within a company, they are the representatives, they are the ambassadors of your brand. So your brand can be great, But if your people are not, or if your people are not aligned, let's say values wise, branding wise with your company, you have a problem. Because nowadays, as we know, everybody is being Googled. And if I Google Chantal and her personal brand or her online presence is not aligned with the company she represents or works for, or the board she's in, there's a disconnect. And then it's like, hey, wait a minute, is she not authentic? Is the brand not authentic? So there is something wrong. So it's become more and more important as individuals, as executives, to create that personal brand and live by it. So that's what we've seen as big, let's say in the past 20 years, really big changes in branding.
Got it. And what about sort of the advent of social media and online? How has that, you've seen sort of the progression, right? Since the early days of online, how is that, how have you seen that change?
Well, that's changed a lot as well. I mean, in our case, we used to publish a book every year with the best stories that we encountered, which was a book with paper, very old fashioned. And now what we're seeing, I mean, since let's say 10, 12 years, it really moved to social media. And social media and online presence, it's a big thing. And the last 2 years since COVID, it's become so much more important to take care of your online presence. And what we see as well, it's not so much about social media, especially not for executives, but it's really about building your online reputation by using your online presence as a great way to talk about yourself, to have people talk about you, to control your online narrative. Social media can be very tricky because everybody's out there all the time and we're tweeting and we're Instagramming and we're TikToking. So you have to be very, very conscious, focused and intentional about what you're putting out there. So it's not just, oh, I like this or I do this, because everything that you put on the internet stays there. I just heard something like, Google will never forget. And these are the things that as an executive and as a board director, you really have to be very conscious what you're putting out there, what your tone of voice, what is the frequency. So it's very important to understand that, again, that everything you put out there, it's out there for journalists, for stakeholders, for employees, investors. So you have to be very intentional and focused on what you put out.
Well, what happens if you make a mistake? And we all are human. We all make mistakes, especially when we're younger, right? Is there any way to sort of delete or let's say repair something that you've done over the years?
It depends a little bit on who has picked it up. I mean, we work with some people who have been in either nasty divorces or who have sued or got sued by their companies, whether it's just or not. And that's there. And it's very hard. I mean, we even tried, calling the Wall Street Journal. There is this article. We really would appreciate if you would take it down because the innocence was proven, let's say. They just don't do that. There are companies who can help you commit digital suicide, as they say. So it's getting rid of everything. How long that will take, how sustainable it is, I don't know. Our philosophy is always create new content and keep creating content and stay relevant and current, so that even if your 10 results on Google, if there is one thing that is not positive, that's okay if the rest is positive or is really positioning you in the right way. The more you publish, the more you push out there, let's say some things will organically go down, but if it's a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times, and if people keep clicking on it, it's going to stay there. So it's very hard to really get rid of things. So that's why if you can, and that's maybe also for younger generations, really beware of what you put out there. Because again, Google doesn't forget.
Right. Thanks for that reminder. Okay, Chantalle, how do you view it? I know you're not an expert like Anouk, but you've obviously been considerate of your brand over the years.
I think it's so, Anouk's perspective from doing this as a practitioner is completely valid. Mine as a customer and someone who initially, needed help amplifying my brand. I think the same on the opposite side of the continuum is you can not have anything out there. So prior to kind of being intentional about this journey, I really didn't have anything out there except what happened haphazardly if I spoke at a conference or I attended something or what I put up on LinkedIn, but it didn't tell the story of who I am as a professional, what I value in my professional workspace, and what I want to amplify. And so not doing anything, I think, is almost as risky as doing the wrong things, to what Anouk just spoke to. And that's really, kind of striking that happy medium of not over engaging, but not under engaging, so that you are putting into the space the messages that you want to share with your potential clients, customers, professional colleagues, and so forth.
That's a really good point about that you can't not do anything, right? I mean, and is that a reality, Nook? I mean, I guess there's some executives out there or professionals that are just sort of like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. That will minimize my risk completely. I will just stay, old school, so to speak. Is that even sort of a realistic choice to make these days?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's everyone's choice. And I don't think you should get pushed into something that you really don't want. It's just, you have to realize if you don't do anything, you're missing out on opportunities. And of course, there are people who say, I'm in a job, I'm okay here, I'm going to stay here until I retire. I don't have any ambition to go to the next professional level. Well, then maybe it doesn't make sense, because it's time, it's money, it's effort, it's thinking. So, there is, you need to want to do it. I understand that there are CEOs who don't do it because they say, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to run any risk, etc. The downside is that the rest of us can talk about this CEO, whatever we want, and that's going to be his online presence. So if you do not create it yourself, someone else will. And if you're a CEO or if you're a sort of a public person, of course, people will talk about you. So it's a balance, but I think at the end of the day, you cannot push someone. But again, I think if you have an ambition, if you have a next professional goal, you cannot deny that the internet is a tool that you have to use to position yourself in order to be selected for interviews. People do a background check, etc. I mean, that's what we use Google for these days.
Right. And invariably, inevitably, everyone's going to retire, right? And people retiring younger and younger. So it behooves folks to be out there a little bit, to sort of, so people can reach out to you for opportunities, personal, professional, everything in between, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we actually just started building a LinkedIn profile for one of our clients who has been in corporate world for a very long time. He's now looking to go to boards, and he didn't even have a LinkedIn. So we started from scratch building his LinkedIn and building his brand, which is good because there's nothing bad, let's say, but it's like, he's like, okay, if I want to be eligible for board seats, I need to start intentionally building my profile.
Got it. And let's circle back to the board opportunities. But Chantalle, first, talk to us about your transformation, your brand, journey, so to speak.
Yes, it's evolved as all things do. So I think originally when I met Anouk and started having this conversation, I was thinking about, what do I want to amplify as my potential value to boards? And by boards, that was nonprofit and for-profit. And I'm still on my journey. I'm not sitting on a for-profit board yet, but that is a aspiration and goal of mine. But I think more importantly, what this really became about was being able to share, with my professional space, what's the value that I add? And then also to go and seek, conversations that ultimately create new ideas and feedback. What are we talking about? So the last over the last year and a half or 2 years, I've been heavily practicing in the D&I space. And you can't just practice with yourself, right? You're only better if you're talking to your colleagues and your peers, right? And so we only have a finite amount of time, but to be able to do that quickly on some social media tools is really helpful to gain ideas and insights. And so it has become, not a singular focused journey for me, but rather an opportunity to share the work that I'm passionate about, share the questions that I'm thinking about, and engage with, my professional colleagues and peers in a way that is meaningful and I hope helpful to others.
Got it. But talk to us about when you realized you really needed to sort of get to the next level as far as branding, because you've been, you've had a really impressive career. Talk to us about, what you 20% where you need to be 10 years ago or 15 years. Give us some sort of sense for how far you've come.
Absolutely. I would say in the last 2 years, I've been very intentional about really highlighting and showcasing and creating a summary for people about the work that I'm doing and the outputs that I have. And that's both to make the conversation easier for someone who is thinking about engaging me or hiring me or calling me about a potential board seat, as well as, for my own professional well-being, to engage more readily with people who have similar ideas. But a short answer to your question, I'd say I became intentional about this about 2 years ago.
Got it. Never too late, right?
Never too late.
But always better to start early, right, Anouk?
Yes, it is, and it's that's an interesting thing, because we also started working with, or we also started working with young generations, because our focus is really working on with senior level people, and we said, well, doing that is great because we're helping people to find board seats or to be prepared for board seats, but we also have to start thinking about the generations that are coming up, and they grew up with social media. So for them, they're tech savvy, but do they know how to build their brand intentionally and use it in the right way? Because of course, we all know, I'm really glad that when I was in university, there were no social media. I mean, especially thinking Google will never forget, but younger people nowadays, it's all there. So you're dancing on the bar, you're drinking, you're doing all that stuff. It's never going to go away. So potential employers, etc., I mean, they see it, they look at you. So you have to be very intentional from a young age, when you're a student or when you're just graduating, to start thinking about building that brand, to start thinking about, okay, what is the value that I add? What can I bring? So that's why we started working with young aspiring professionals from underrepresented groups and helping them build their brand and their online presence exactly in the same way as we do for our senior executives, but starting from a young age, so we can help them kickstart their career, but also really make them very conscious about the fact, yes, you're social media and tech savvy, but there is a certain way of doing it, and you have to be, again, intentional about how to build your brand.
Got it. And before we get to sort of trends that you're seeing in branding and storytelling, I want to ask about boards, right? Advisory boards, boards of directors. I know a lot of your work is centered on sort of building folks' profiles or brands so that they can segue or sit on boards during their professional career or in retirement. Retirement doesn't really happen these days, but talk to us about sort of how things have changed in that respect and how you've helped, clients.
Yeah. I think the biggest change in the past 2.5, 3 years that we've seen is that a lot of people from underrepresented groups have kind of woken up and seen, hey, wait a minute, it's our time to get on boards. There's more opportunities, whether it's by mandate or whether it's by just companies realizing that we need to have diverse boards, that we've seen an influx and an increase working with people with diverse candidates for boards. And the interesting thing is that the background is different. The drive is different. The motivation is usually coming from something much stronger than, let's say, the majority groups for whom it's, let's say, a logical step in their career. So we see a big change there, which is really interesting, which is also the focus that we have as a company. And boards are, from the perspective of boards, we're seeing that they're widening their pool. So it's no longer you must have been a sitting CEO, etc. So they're looking for younger people on boards. They're looking for much more diversity on boards, all kinds of diversity. I just learned there's also neurodiversity, which is interesting, which is for people with, let's say, autistic people, or so it's a whole new category of diversity as well. So boards are looking for all these kinds of different things. And why? Because look at the times we live in. We've never been, at least not in modern history, in such a multi-pandemic kind of situation. So we need entrepreneurs on our board. We need people who think out of the box. We cannot have a group of CEOs because that's groupthink. They think alike. So we need really to diversify that board and those management teams in order to get new, fresh ideas on how to deal with all the crises and pandemics that we're in.
Got it. And Chantalle, talk to us about your experience. How has, your improved branding affected sort of more inbound inquiries, or when you go out, you're more effective?
Absolutely. And I do want to touch on one point about coming at this from the angle of a minority professional as well, that to add on to Nick's prior point. But for me, number one, it's just good hygiene and good housekeeping to keep track of my online professional presence and the summary about that and what I want to highlight. Someone such as myself, I've done a lot of different things. And when I just came into potential interviews or employment conversations, from the perspective of, well, you've seen my resume, now let me talk about who I am. A lot of times people would be confused and say, well, you could do so many things. What do you want to do? And so this helps you kind of amplify the key messages and the core messages that you want to share in this season. They have changed for me. They'll change for anyone who's going on this journey. But I can start from what I want to put out first and then bring people along to other spaces and places where I may have not done this for a while, but I have this skill, et cetera, have this portfolio. I continue to someplace different to look more deeply at a particular type of experience. So I find I have much more concise conversations. I'm able to highlight and help people see very quickly what I stand for professionally, what I have done, what I'm seeking to do, what I'm engaged and enthusiastic about. I just find the conversations start from a place of people kind of come into that conversation saying, oh, I feel like I know you, right? Especially when you add to that you have video and audio and podcasts. You really, anyone who's doing their due diligence on you really can spend time gaining insight into your thinking.
Got it.
And then the second piece I just want to add very quickly, as a minority and a woman, we are so often enculturated that telling your story and amplifying that is bragging. And that's something that people from, majority in groups don't experience, I think, as frequently if we look at the research. And so this part of this journey, and I am tugging, people with me all the time, is you're not being boastful to share with people what your professional value is, right? That's actually going to help someone who wants to engage you and your thinking or your services or your value to the equation, whether that's a board or a job or a client. So I think it's very important for people to feel good about telling their story and the work that they're doing every day.
Yeah, no doubt. And so what type of board would you want to be on 5 years from now? If you could just wave a magic wand, this is sort of envisioning what you want, but also telegraphing to possible hiring folks.
I love being part of companies that are in a growth phase and a growth stage, and they are looking for seasoned executives who have the discipline, the prior discipline and experience, and have seen numerous business cycles and bring good thinking, but also have the space for entrepreneurship and innovation, and ultimately are helping that company, move into new markets or new ways of doing business.
Great. Good to know. So Anouk, you've seen everything as far as the trends, right? Now you've obviously social media. How does that impact branding? Talk to us about sort of what you've been seeing the past few years as far as branding and storytelling trends.
Yeah. Well, I think it's all becoming bigger, and we started storytelling in 2002. And that was, let's say, nobody had heard of the word storytelling, and so it kind of grew, and then it became this enormous buzzword, and I think it now kind of found its, let's say, its place. And what we're seeing is that there is a lot of corporate storytelling, but there's also individual storytelling. And the funny thing is that we were having a social event several days ago, and then you meet new people, and they start telling their life story. And it's like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's like, you guys, you need to learn how to tell a story. If you meet someone for the first time, make sure you tell your story in 2 minutes, and then you give the other person the opportunity to tell their story. So it's really in every situation. So it's in a personal situation, in a professional situation. Storytelling is not just corporate storytelling where we have a story about our company. It's about how we present ourselves. It's how we present an idea. Everything is about telling a story. If I give you information, you're going to forget it. If I tell you the same information in a story, you will remember it. And stories, every story follows a certain curve. So it starts here, we're living our lives, we're doing things, and then something happens, and then we go, whoa, wow, something really bad happens. And then at the end of the story, we're here, so we're higher than where we start. There's always a curve in a story. If the story is flat, it's not interesting. So it's really important to think about, in every situation, if you're selling an idea, if you're meeting someone, if you want to convey a message, you have to think about putting it into a story. Because it's not about what you want to say, it's about what you want your audience to remember. And that's the thing that most people do not realize. Okay, I have this and this information, and this is what I want to give you. No, what do I want you guys to remember? 3 things, max. There's an interesting thing if we talk about the amount of messages we can give to people. We all know blood, sweat, and tears, right? 3 things. Actually, the original one was blood, sweat, tears, and toil. But because we just cannot remember 4 things, the toil left the group, let's say, so it became blood, sweat, and tears. So 3 things at most in your story, that's it.
Got it. That's really good to remember for folks. Now, why don't we just do you said 2 minutes, right? If you're someone that's telling their story. So if possible, either of you, can we get an example of what that might look like, right? If you're in a personal environment, friends, whatever, or social occasion, and professional, and maybe they're distinctly different or not. You tell me, do they overlap? Are they distinctly different, or what? How should people take what we're hearing here and really put into action?
Are you asking us to tell a story, or to just tell how to tell a story?
Well, if you want, it would be great if you could tell the story. Tell a 2-minute what you would tell in a personal and a professional. If you could, that would be helpful. Or Chantalle, if you want to take it, I'm sure your messaging is perfect. I don't know how you want to take this, but I think that would help people sort of understand sort of what you just mentioned, which is really really important, right? 3 things, but also it's got to go flow.
Yeah. Chantalle, you want to go?
I'll give you a piece and a part. I'll give you some similarities and contrast between the two. So both my professional and my personal story, if you say, tell me about, start with I am. My professional one is I am ultimately someone who works to help businesses perform better. So I don't care what context or whom I'm speaking to, what industry, what sector, what potential board, that's where I start professionally. And I think of that as kind of the top of my pyramid. And then I start filling in parts of my story that I think are most salient for the conversation that I want to have or that I'm engaging in with that person professionally. Now, flipping the script, I also start with I am professionally on the personal side, but I may, whatever context I'm engaging with you in, I may talk about where I'm from. I am from here, or I'm, a woman of color, or I grew up out of the country, or, that I think is more like an index card file for those of us who remember having that. That card can flip and move around depending on how I'm ultimately desiring to connect to someone. But my professional byline and I am statement does not change. Not certainly can evolve, but it does not change between conversations. And I've found that it's effective and it works to then ground my conversation and allow it to move across other domains.
Got it. And Anouk, that line that Chantalle said about I help companies, is it always, you always want to be having a line like that where you are helping or supporting? Can you talk to that?
Yeah. Well, it depends on who you are and what you want to convey. I mean, my sentence is it's similar to Chantalle's, but it's like, I support women and minorities in leadership, help achieve their next professional goal. That's my first line. And then again, depending on the audience that I have in front of me, I take several pieces from my story. And the thing is, what I want to convey I want to make sure that you understand that I have international experience. So instead of telling you I have international experience, I tell you I grew up in Amsterdam. I did business in Europe. Then we went to the United States. And I lived in Brazil. I went to the Middle East. So I don't have to tell you that I'm international because that's part of my story. So the things that you want to convey in your story, those 3 key messages, make sure that you capture them or package them in your story. So instead of saying I worked here, there, don't talk about that. Because people are not interested in hearing your resume. If it's a personal story or a personal introduction, I always talk about that I love to travel. I'm an anthropologist. I'm very curious. I travel the world. And then immediately with most people, you have a connection. What's your favorite country? Or where did you go last? Or where do you want to go? Or, oh, I'm traveling there and there. What should I think of? So you immediately create a connection. And it's the same thing when you start talking about your professional introduction. If you talk about, and that's what Chantalle does as well, a high level. We have no idea yet what she does, but we know about her purpose. And then we say, wow, that's interesting. Tell me more. Well, if she would start reciting, let's say, her resume, it's like, it's boring. We don't care at which company she worked. We care about who she is and the value that she brings.
That's really helpful. Thank you for going through that. And that's really instructive for people as they think about presenting themselves, right? Everyone says you need to have a pitch, but we don't take the time to sort of think through that. And I like that purpose and then filling in the gaps. That really helps. Now, as far as any other trends that you're seeing, I mean, I know that, with all the social media, how do you choose the social media you are in and what do you put there, right? There's obviously personal and there's professional. And for example, I just launched on TikTok, it's professional, but there's so many options and you have to be so sort of considerate and cautious, right? In some way, because a lot of these are all fun and entertainment where mistakes can be made. So how do you see that and how do you sort of advise folks?
Yeah. I'd like to answer it, but I also would like to get Chantalle's perspective on this. First, what you have to look at is who's your target audience and where are they? So if you are looking for a board seat, then your target audience is executive search professionals, sitting CEOs and board members. They're probably on LinkedIn. Maybe they're on Twitter, less likely, especially from a professional standpoint, on Instagram or TikTok. So think about your target audience. Also think about what are you trying to achieve? Let's say you're looking for new clients. How many new clients do you want? Do you want to have 5 real good ones or do you want to have 1,000? So it's all these, there are so many factors that come into play before you can decide, okay, so I'm going to put all my efforts onto Facebook because I'm trying to connect with consumers, for example. So there's a lot of questions you have to ask yourself before you decide. And then again, thinking about your target audience, decide on your tone of voice. What is the message that you're going to convey? We think it's very important that you stick to your topic or topics. In my case, I communicate about personal branding and online presence. That's it. Why? Because I want my audience to know in which situations to connect with me. If you have an issue with your personal brand or an issue with your online presence, connect with me. I also care about the environment. I care about many things, but that's not my core. So it's very important that you stick to that as well on your social media.
Great advice. All right, Chantalle, what's your perspective on social media?
I agree completely with Anouk. I come into this from a perspective of audience analysis and segmentation as well. So for my professional, output, it's LinkedIn for me. I'd gotten off Facebook over a decade ago. I engage in Instagram in a personal way just to be supportive of other friends' businesses and efforts. So I think just being very intentional, looking at whatever the medium is and using it for your advantage and being very intentional about it. I think what people are guilty of is feeling like they have to have a presence all over the place. And there's a lot of I call it stream of consciousness messaging. And when you are wanting to communicate a brand, it's confusing, if you're just spouting out everything you react to, or every conversation you're having some type of input into it, versus to Anouk's point, she has two things that she wants to constantly talk about with her professional networks, right? I have a set of things that I want to either be known for or called for or engage in conversation about in my professional spaces. And so being intentional about that, kind of keeps your output well groomed and clean. And then it's also less work, frankly, than feeling like, well, I should be on this forum and that forum and over here and over there.
That's really good. It's hard to keep it. For a lot of people, Anouk, I think, particularly for me, I think to keep it to 2 or 3 things is it's challenging, but important, right? Can you just talk to that a little bit more?
Yeah. It all starts actually with defining your personal brand. And the moment that you have that brand on a high enough level, you can also start defining your communication topics. So if I want to be a thought leader for this specific topic, that's going to be your topic. And you cannot be a thought leader or an expert in 10 different topics. Unless you have to make sure that, or not unless, but you have to make sure that the topic, let's say, is high enough level. So if you would say, okay, my topic is DEI, that's an enormous big topic. So if DEI is your topic, then you can talk about all these different perspectives, angles, approaches, etc. So it gives you a lot of different things to talk about, but it's always DEI related. So I think it's really important to do that, because you don't just want to be all over the place. Yeah, you have to talk to Jim. Well, what is Jim about? Well, I don't know, because he's all over the place all the time. In your case, you have your podcast and the topics are completely different every time. That's fine, because if you position yourself higher as the podcast host who is giving people a voice or who is sharing interesting insights, that's then, let's say, your positioning, and your topic is about giving people a voice or whatever it would be. And that those topics are different all the time, that doesn't matter, because you're positioned on that higher level.
Got it. That's very helpful. Thank you. So what about, we mentioned this before about advice for younger generations. And if there's anyone that has questions, please submit them now. What about for younger generations? What specific advice are you giving, and has that changed over time?
It has not changed over time for us, because we kind of started focusing on the younger generations like a year and a half ago. And the advice is, as I said before, that you really have to be very intentional as well. So that's the same advice for everyone. And especially young people who are being a lot on social media, just be aware of what you're putting out there. Because people say, yeah, but my Facebook is private. It's not really private. I mean, everything you put out there can be found because it can be private, but if someone decides, hey, that's a great picture, let's share it, it's out there. So that's, it's just beware. And I think that's the be aware of everything you put out there can be found and can be seen by anyone virtually.
Got it. Now we've just been through, hopefully, through a pandemic. How has that changed how you advise clients, Anouk, and how has that affected you, Chantalle, as far as online? We always talk about going to conferences, speaking, being a thought leader. Of course, being online presents other opportunities, but challenges as well. How are you envisioning sort of everything moving to Zoom, at least for now? How can folks take advantage of that? And then as we open up more, do more in person, how do you see that when you advise clients? And Chantalle, how do you see that as you consider opportunities?
Well, I think it has brought a lot of opportunities. I think there's many people who have been speaking more on panels since the pandemic because it's easier. I think there's much more content out there than there was before, because we all know organizing an in-person event is much more difficult, etc., than organizing an online event. So I think that's brought a lot of good things. I think the hybrid world is going to be the same. I'm going to be speaking at a conference which is partly virtual and partly in person. So there are, let's say, hybrid events coming up as well, which of course for travel and pollution, etc., is a good thing, because we don't necessarily need to be in places. But of course, the networking part that you have at conferences, that's completely changed, and that's become a lot harder. Also, when you talk about people who are trying to find mentors or sponsors, it's become a lot harder in the online world. So that's what we need to still, I think, need to adjust and find new ways.
Got it. And Chantalle, how do you see it?
I think mostly it's been good. Obviously, the initial reason wasn't so great for society, but it's been good, right? Doors have opened. We flattened bias, whether it's unconscious or conscious bias. So many of the factors and considerations, people like people that look like them. So when people pick panels and speakers, very often they look like them. And so now you really have the opportunity to step back and say, I have access to great minds all over the world. And I can do that and bring that to people. I can record it and have people, engage asynchronously. And I also think from a networking perspective, and this is part of my work and my qualitative research, when your network has a good core to it, if you just create a bridge to one or two or three other places that you wouldn't normally access, you gain exponentially in terms of offerings, time, talent, and new potential connections. And I think we're really seeing I know I'm, professionally and personally seeing the benefits of that type of intentionality. And I think we're in a season where that can continue to be so useful to us.
Right. Well, and I think specifically to that point, I know I've seen it, I've recommended to a board I sit on, that we can think about people, they don't have to be in this town. People need to be, and to get the best talent, you might have to get someone who's not always here in this town and might not be able to make board meetings in person. Now that, one of the benefits, we're so used to Zoom now, we can have more engagement, inclusivity on Zoom, right? And we can get the best talent from anywhere. And I think that's a real opportunity if people sort of take it. There's a question about what pointers would you give those attempting to rebrand themselves as they attempt to enter a new business sector as an employee or as an entrepreneur?
Well, I think one of the most important things that you really have to understand what your unique benefit points are. So what is the problem that you solve for a company? What is the benefit that you offer, and why you and not someone like you? So really start thinking about the things that make you stand out, the things that make you unique, and how you can add value to this new industry or to this new business. I mean, there's lots of things to think about, but really defining who you are and the value that you bring. coming from another industry. So again, also focus on the future. Yes, you have that background, but how can you use that background and, let's say, rethink it so that it becomes valuable for another industry?
Got it. What about, I had this conversation with a friend the other day. They work for a big corporation, yet they have a side hustle, a brand, a company. And how should folks sort of position themselves, their brand, especially when it's sort of this strange, and companies have to be more flexible than ever, right? So we're in this good space for people who want to be entrepreneurial, and there's so many of them, and I'm so excited by that. But it's got to be tricky. They want to be successful in their side hustle, but they want to keep their day job, and they want to be loyal to that company. How do you advise clients who are in that sort of situation?
I think two things are important. I think one is transparency and the other one is authenticity. So I think it's very important that you are your authentic self and present yourself the way you are. And again, if you go beyond your job title, but talk about who you are and what you stand for, then this is who you are. You're doing your job and you're doing your side hustle. And transparency, I think you have to talk to your manager or to your boss, to the company you work for, and explain to them that this is what you're doing. So you're not trying to do anything behind their backs or whatever. So I think if you solve those two things, I think you're in a good place.
Got it. And Chantalle, how do you view that?
This is part of my lived professional experience, right? So again, I am my value proposition, and I'll just go ahead and state another part of that, which is I see myself as an authentic voice of change for women, very senior women in C-level roles, and overall inclusion. And so whether I do that by lending my time and talents to an employer or do that for an individual client or group of clients, that's just about address, right? And location. I can do both with integrity, again, to Anouk's point, with transparency to that employer. And so that's more about my professional life. And when it comes to my board aspirations, again, everyone's in a different place and stage in their career, but I'm personally at a stage in my career where I wouldn't take an opportunity that wouldn't allow me to consider to engage in a board position as long as it was not in direct conflict to that employer. So I've had conversations with potential employers where they've said, oh, we don't like our senior executives, to be engaged in outside board activity. Well, that's actually a good conversation to have in those formative stages, because maybe that's not the right place for me at the point and position that I'm at professionally. So again, I think anything that draws out more clarity, more transparency, more authenticity about what you want. Remember, you're always lending your time and talents in exchange for payment. That employer or client is providing you with their best resources for your best thinking. And so I think when you come to these relationships with mutual respect and transparency, you'll be surprised the amount of leverage and space that people have. I've changed a CEO's mind when I've said, I won't take this opportunity if I cannot consider board engagements. And, when I explained my why as a woman of color, he backed down on his position around that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Chantalle, because I think that's a conversation that a lot of people want to have and are sort of tentative and hesitant about it because they just assume there's this whole legalese at a big company where you can't take board seats and it's constricting. And I guess now more than ever, employees have leverage. Anouk, have you seen that?
Yes, I agree with that. And I think it's a shift that is taking place. And I think as a company, if you're not willing to change those policies and if you're not willing to be open-minded about it, I'm not sure how long in the future, let's say, you're actually going to thrive. I mean, I think and I hope that's going to be a sustainable change. And the next generations, our generation, the generation coming after us, we're different and we have different demands. And I think that we're more and more willing and able to state what we want. And if we don't agree, we're just not going to work for the company, no matter how big the company is. I heard two great examples lately. I know a woman, she was asked to be the CMO of a really, 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 really cool and good company, but there was some kind of hitch or glitch or whatever, and she said no, and it was a really big job, much bigger than the job that she has currently, but she said, it just doesn't fit with my values, I cannot be me, so I declined the job. And another one was a lawyer, she's in her 30s, and they wanted to buy her away from another firm. They offered her money, and she was like, the culture at that other law firm is not that great, so I'm going to decline the offer. And I think we're getting to in a situation, and I hope we're going to stay there, that we as employees or partners, or that we can choose the environments where we can really thrive and be ourselves. So I hope that's going to last, and we'll have more of those stories.
Absolutely. That's a great way to sort of close out this conversation on that positive note. But before we do, I want to make sure I ask, share with us just one tip we should all know about online branding. Anouk?
Yes. One of the most important aspects when we talk about your online brand is that we should focus on the future. Every time we talk to people, we talk about our bio, we look at our LinkedIn, we look at our resume, it's all about what we did in the past. That's not starting a conversation. So I say we have to shift gears toward the future, where we talk about the value that we bring, the vision that we have, the things that we can add, because that's going to be a conversation starter, and that will help us create new opportunities for the future.
Great. Chantalle?
I would offer stay current on your impact tracking. If you let yourself get, I'd say, more than a quarter away from really sharing and highlighting and summarizing your accomplishments, it becomes pretty tricky to keep up. And then I'd also say get help.
Great advice. Well, this has been a great conversation and really informative. I want to thank both of you for coming. Before we end, I usually ask for a poem or a saying. So Chantalle, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to share just the last few stanzas of a favorite poem that has been guiding to my life by Mary Oliver, called The Journey. There was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the one thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
Lovely. Thank you. Anouk?
I'm not going to say anything. I cannot top that. No, I have something which is related to our topic. So it's not a poem, but it's a quote that I really like. And it says, you need an online image. Otherwise, not having an image becomes your image.
That's a great way to end. Thank you both for coming together today. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.